Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science, Facts, and Fallacies podcast, episode 280. Nice round number. Getting up there. I feel like a senior veteran podcaster. My name's Cameron English, joined as always by Dr. Liza Dunn. What's up, Liza? How are you?
Not much. I can't believe it's been over a year.
I
I
know.
thought we might be getting close to a year and a half now.
It,
Now that I think about it, I feel very senior at podcasting now.
yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a minute since Dr. Kevin Folta passed the torch when his daughter was born. That guy's crazy anyway because he does his own podcast and then he's a full professor and then he does all of his stuff on the internet. It's just insane. So, anyways, well, of course, we're always glad to have Liza, and we had our latest space today, which you can go listen to on Twitter, on X. It was really good. It was all about the Olympic boxing controversy. I dare say there was more expertise and more factual information in our space than there has been in any single news story that you've read about that, because we had multiple physicians. We had I want to say an Olympic level athlete participate. Sort
She
of
was
out.
NAAC or NCAA.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So she was up in the echelon where people move on to the Olympics. Someone who's very familiar with this. So go listen to that. You'll learn a lot. And there was no one there saying you have to think this way, or you're fired, or you're a bigot, or you're canceled. That's not a thing that we do. So if you want to learn what's really going on, go listen to that. And we will move on with our stories here, which are always interesting, to say the least. The stuff we've got today is it's sort of next level, Liza. So let's just jump into these. So first
Yeah.
up, can we repurpose parasites to deliver drugs to the brain? I told you so, right? FDA rejects MDMA-assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder in a setback for psychedelic medicine. And finally, Johnson & Johnson nears $6.48 billion settlement, with most plaintiffs claiming talc caused their cancer. These are just insane lawsuits that we'll get to in a second here. But let's start here, Liza. I'm not familiar with I guess I'm generally using, microorganisms to deliver medicine. But this is by Tina Say, writing for Science News, and the title is "Can We Repurpose Parasites to Deliver Drugs to the Brain?" So can you give us just like a brief breakdown of so fascinating? So using these little microbes to deliver medicine to people. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's this is a really interesting article. So, first of all, what's toxoplasmosis? So they're talking about a parasite that is able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And it's very difficult for drug makers to get things across the blood-brain barrier. Your brain wants to protect itself. It's a sanctuary site in your body. It wants to protect itself from toxins and wants to protect itself from infections and things like that, because it's the command and control center. And toxoplasmosis is a parasite that manages to cross the blood-brain barrier. In the most of the time in immunocompetent adults, it doesn't cause any problem. It's kind of a latent infection. It doesn't really cause any symptoms whatsoever. You may have like a little bit of a flu-like illness with a acute infection, but most of the time it stays kind of dormant. If you become immunosuppressed, if you have chemotherapy, or if you get HIV, or have some kind of weakened immune system, it can start to replicate and cause cysts in the brain, abscess-like things in the brains that can cause seizures and a variety of other problems. It also can really affect children if pregnant women get infected with toxoplasmosis, and children, their offspring can get very badly injured by that. So those are the two situations where it tends to be more of a problem. Now, the reason why these researchers thought it was interesting was because they thought, because of its capability of getting into neuronal tissue, it might be able to actually carry and deliver a drug. So some drugs are proteins, made out of proteins, and proteins tend to be too big too water soluble. They're hydrophilic, so they like water, and so it's very hard for them to get across lipid membranes. The membranes of your cells are have a fatty layer in there, and so water soluble proteins have a hard time getting across. And same thing with proteins tend to be charged. So if you have a big chunky protein that you would like to deliver into the brain in order to treat a disease and get into that sanctuary site, it's hard to find a carrier that's big enough to do that. It's very hard to find a nanoparticle that can cross or other carriers. And so the thought is that in this particular study, you could maybe use some of the features of the toxoplasmosis parasite to get across the blood-brain barrier and deliver certain drugs. So there were two proteins within the organism that do really interesting things to inject or get other proteins into the neurons. So there's rhoptree, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and then dense granules. And so the organism has these proteins that will kind of kiss another cell. They'll come out of the organism, kiss another cell, and deliver a payload into that cell. That's called rhoptree, and it's an organelle. And so it'll secrete whatever it's carrying into the neuron. And then there are these dense granules that are organelles that actually go intracellularly in a vacuole into a neuron and deliver their protein payload that way. So they took several different proteins to see if this is kind of like a concept idea, proof of concept idea. Took a couple of different proteins to see if they could get the organism to inject it or spill it into the neurons, and they found that they were able to do that with the dense granules a little bit better than the others. And so it's really, really fascinating proof of concept idea that you may be able to put drugs into the brain and cross blood-brain barrier a little bit more easily. One of the things that I thought was fascinating about this was it looked like that the two places that the toxoplasmosis organism liked to go to were the brain's cortex. So that's the kind of outer layer of the brain where the and sort of where you see all the gyri and everything like that. And then the striatum. Now, what's so particularly interesting about the striatum is that that's sort of deep in the brain. It is where the neurons that produce dopamine are. And if you lose those neurons, you get Parkinson's disease. And so I thought it was fascinating that you could get that the toxoplasmosis organism itself tended to head to that part of the brain. And if you think about it, one of the problems with the treatment of Parkinson's is people take a drug called levodopa. Dopamine itself cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, so levodopa actually can. And you have to often take higher and higher doses of it to be able to mitigate the symptoms of your Parkinson's disease. Now, if you could actually target the organism to the striatum and deliver dopamine directly to that region, you might not have as many side effects as you do with levodopa over the years. So I thought that was a very fascinating thing, one. And the other fascinating thing I was wondering about is that nobody knows what causes Parkinson's, but there's a huge burden of toxoplasmosis in the human population. And I wonder if I don't know if there's any validity to this, but I wonder if there's an association between that infection and the development of Parkinson's disease, because it turns out that the affected uh, nerves that were delivered this payload wound up having neuronal death. So it's hard to see. It's hard to tease out, but it's a fascinating study, and I hope I didn't just blow all sorts of science that got everybody confused. But I think it's really interesting.
Yes, this is all preliminary. None of this should be taken as gospel that you're hearing, right? This is brand new research that we're just introducing you to. So go look into it. From what I'm hearing you say, this is a long way off from any kind of
Oh
clinical
yeah.
significance. This is going to take probably decades of more research to figure out, for one, if this is safe, and then if it actually is efficacious for delivering different medications.
But it's a fascinating science question, and this is the way science should be done. One of the other interesting things that was looked at, and I'm not sure if they what they found. And recently, no, I guess, how long ago did John McCain die of his glioblastoma?
I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah, something like that, right?
something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, maybe Biden was running for office then.
I think
Anyway,
Trump was still in office because I remember the press asking him about it. So
yeah.
probably late term, yeah.
So it was really interesting because one of the things that they were thinking about doing was not for John McCain in particular, but it came up around this time. So glioblastoma is a brain tumor, and it's a very aggressive brain tumor that you tend to have maybe a 5 to 9 month prognosis, lifespan after the diagnosis. And when you do a biopsy, the neurons in there that are replicating very, 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 very quickly are very immature. So they're immature. It's thought to arise from immature stem cells in the brain, right? So that give rise to neurons. Anyway, it turns out that the Zika virus preferentially targets immature brains, or brains that are in development. And so some people are looking into whether or not the Zika virus, some of the traits of the Zika virus, can be used to target glioblastoma, because because when you know that if a pregnant woman gets infected with Zika, the babies often have very, very severe brain damage. And those are all rapidly dividing neurons that are developing in the brain. And so some people are thinking that if you could take the Zika virus and have it deliver right to the glioblastoma, you might selectively be able to target those cells as opposed to the rest of the cells and shrink the tumor that way. This would be something along the lines of something that could possibly deliver something like that. And so I don't know. It's kind of it's all very interesting speculation. Cool stuff, though.
So making brain cancer treatable is, if I'm hearing you right, like if this
Yeah.
pans out, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Mother Nature's pretty amazing.
Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Just the fact that your body knows what to do with that, apparently, that's what always fascinates me. Is we get really excited about these new drugs or these new gene editing therapies, but that your body just goes, oh yeah, I know exactly where to put that.
That's exactly right. That's what. So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the toxoplasmosis organism, it's usually ingested as and then it's able to move up from the gut into the brain, which is very unusual. So you could have it be in a pill form kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, we'll no doubt revisit this. Seems like something that people will want to keep looking into, just for all the potential it has.
That's right.
Okay, let's move on though. This is I want to say this is like the 3rd out of 4 weeks where we've talked about psychedelics, Liza. But this is fascinating, and it's practical too because of what it's dealing with. So this is from NBC News. It's written by Berkeley Lovelace Jr. It's a very beautiful name for a journalist.
It is,
by the way.
isn't it?
So this is called FDA Rejects MDMA-Assisted Therapy for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and a Setback for Psychedelic Medicine. Okay, I don't want to ask you to rehash your entire presentation on tryptamines and how these drugs work and Albert Hoffman, but maybe you could just give a short rundown of what these are and why there's potential for them to treat these disorders.
So MDMA is ecstasy. It's 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine, and has been, well, it was actually synthesized in 1912 and kind of left alone until the 1970s when a guy by the name of Alexander Shulgin, who is a chemist, heard reports that people were having really good kind of psychedelic experiences, not real hallucinations, but kind of psychedelic hallucinations with it. And so I want to say in 1976, he decided to make his own little batch of it and tried it out, just like Albert Hoffman tried out LSD in, I want to say 1943 maybe. Yeah, you hear things like this all the time. Sometimes it has a really unfortunate side effect like MPTP, which made everybody very, very Parkinsonian when they were making illicit Demerol and wound up shooting it up, and then they got, very, very sick. But sometimes people kind of like the experience, and that's what happened with LSD, and that's what happened with ecstasy. So it was used for psychotherapy in the 70s, and then got diverted into the rave scene a lot, and lots of ravers were using it. And then there was a rumor that actually there was an article in Science that made the claim that monkeys who had been given several tablets of ecstasy over a 4-day period, not a huge dose, all had holes in their brains, and the serotonergic nerves had regressed. And so there was a huge scare. Ecstasy was banned, and they looked at these monkeys a couple of years later, the half that hadn't gotten sacrificed, and found that persistent neurologic changes, neurodegeneration was there. So big, huge scare. And ecstasy went by the wayside for a while. But the people who had worked with it before, the psychotherapists that had worked with it before and had felt like it had been very beneficial to their patients, were saying, if this did in fact eat holes in your brain, you would expect to see very significant side effects, right? You wouldn't expect to have these people going to raves and then going to finishing college or going to work the next morning and things like that. So you should see a phenotype that's associated with that. So they went back to the study and looked at it and realized that they had used methamphetamine instead of methylene dioxymethamphetamine. And that had, so they had to retract the study. And if you think about it, methamphetamine does have several side effects that are well known. Tweaking, where you've got very, very wildly agitated psychomotor dysfunction, people with twitching, and they get muscle wasting and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's they had to retract it. Now there's no doubt that excess amphetamine and amphetamine-like substances in the brain can cause problems, right? Excess amphetamine. Or on nervous tissue, like when you do in vitro studies, you can see things happen. And amphetamines and MDMA work in a really interesting way in that, well, MDMA especially. MDMA will help your neurons in your brain release serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And once it gets into the nerves that release those neurotransmitters, and then what it'll do is it turns around the pump that actually pumped it into that nerve terminal, and it will start actively pumping out norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. And it also make the vesicles that carry those neurotransmitters at the end of the neuron leaky. So it makes everything leaky, and it's actively pumping stuff out. So why is that important? Well, serotonin is really important for mood and modulating mood. And so if you have extra serotonin floating around, people think that makes you happier. Same thing with norepinephrine. You've got several different antidepressants that have the release of both of those things. And then dopamine is important in addiction. Although I got to say, you don't see a lot of people wandering around in the throes of ecstasy addiction. Now, there are several bad things that are on the free market that can make you have seizures and things like that. So you don't want a bad batch of ecstasy. So it needs to be absolutely regulated. But it's potentially got a lot of promise for problems like PTSD. And it's because of the serotonin modulating effects that decrease anxiety and decrease and decrease depression. So I'm interested to see how this study turns out. The FDA didn't like this particular study, but there are several other studies ongoing. And I think it's more of a technical reason rather than a scientific reason for why they don't like this study.
Yeah, I'm sort of torn on this. On the one hand, you need to scrutinize these kind of drugs very carefully before you
Mm-hmm.
mass prescribe them or give people, wide access to them. But at the same time, I know from experience that the FDA's standards for certain products are just obscenely stupid, and they're arbitrary, and they're influenced by politics more than they are anything else. And so you will have, in a different case, right, a company will submit a product for authorization, and then the FDA will reject it out of hand. And then it comes out later that the reason they did that is because they got orders from on high that we're just not approving these products. Now, they won't say that publicly, but that's what's going on behind closed doors. So can you give us any sense of what their concerns were? The article talks about, there were problems with the way the trial was conducted. They also say what you said a few weeks ago, which is that there are suspicions that the patients knew who was in the control group and who was in the test group, as well as the researchers. And now what they don't say in the article is like, well, yeah, duh, because if somebody's tripping, it's hard to, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So a couple of things that they said, yeah, these are very hard to blind studies because people who are taking not mood altering drugs, but mind altering drugs are easy to spot, right? And people who take ecstasy or LSD have very dilated pupils. That's you can't hide that, right? People who take LSD are fluidly hallucinating, clearly, right? And people who take ecstasy, even though they're not really hallucinating. This is really called more of an entheogen rather than a hallucinogen. They're spaced out. You can tell that they're kind of on another dimension, right? But they're not fluidly hallucinating like with LSD. So it's hard to blind that. So to do a real randomized controlled double-blind study, the patients and the practitioners should not be aware of what's going on. And there's just no way around this. And so that was one of the complaints that the FDA had about it. The other complaint that the FDA had about it is that if the patients knew that they were getting ecstasy, the participants in the study were probably already of the persuasion that ecstasy was going to help them. So is that introducing a bias to the study because the participants are over-reporting the benefit of this because they like the ecstasy? So that was another issue. And then there was a reference to some improper thing that happened in the study, but that reference wasn't clarified. So I don't know what the details of that reference are, but
some sort of sexual harassment or sexual assault. So that, I mean, God knows what that is. Right. But it figures that it's with like a Schedule I drug that you
right.
Like that's when it happens, is when a couple other things, and this rings true from some other stuff I've read recently, but this group called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, which evaluates the cost and effectiveness of drugs, they've been critical of the development of this particular medicine. And they said that people in the trial treated psychedelics, here's a direct quote, more like a religious movement than like pharmaceutical products. And then the reason I laugh at that and why I think it's amusing is because there was another article published. This is on a Substack by Jules Evans, who writes about drugs. And this was recommended by Mark Gunther, who's another great journalist who covers psychedelics. But the story talks about how there's a lot of veterans this doesn't work for. In fact, a lot of them start to experience suicidal ideation, or it comes back when they start taking psychedelics. And this one veteran, just a quick quote here. She heard about this the way lots of people do, which is you're on this cocktail of medications. Maybe you could take this one time and then get off your meds. And of course, she heard that and went, "Well, that's great. I don't want to take, eight pharmaceuticals or whatever." So she went on an ayahuasca retreat to
Oh
Mexico,
my gosh.
and she's recounting the experience. So she says there were 10 female participants, one veteran liaison, and a male facilitator, plus an indigenous Peruvian curandero. I may have mispronounced that. Her name is Rachel. So she says Rachel was bemused by the rituals, the flower baths, the sweat lodge, the prayers to Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Stone, but tried to stay respectful. And so it goes on to recount how she and lots of other veterans, they take these drugs and then they start thinking about how good of an idea it would be to kill themselves, right? So it seems to me, and again, despite my deep disdain for certain departments within the FDA, it sounds like they may have some solid footing here to go. It's going to be expensive and it's going to take a long time, but maybe you do need to do a better trial in this case.
Yeah, I think that now I do think that there's still some trials ongoing, but you really, I feel like we've unleashed a whole bunch of recreational drugs on the United States in the past 20 years. And I would like to see a little bit more rigor around the unleashing of it because the consequences of that have been fairly monumental. So,
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Stop complaining, Dr. Liza. It's great, right?
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, see, we'll legalize it and then they'll be regulated and they'll be safe. And
Except for there's a whole black market in it anyway.
yeah, there won't be there won't be a huge influx of emergency room visits. The drugs won't get more potent because we know that never happens. People will drive very well. It'll be fine.
It's just all going to be good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, this isn't to say you should keep these all legal. There's an insanity to that pot is still, I think it's still a Schedule 1 drug as far as the federal government is concerned. Yeah.
I think so.
I mean, there are states in God bless California. When I play in my backyard with my kids, they get a contact high because my neighbors get to smoke and grow as much marijuana as they like because, let freedom ring or whatever. Anyways, it looks to me as we wrap up on this story, there's a number of experts quoted in this NBC article who seem to say, this is a setback, but it's only a matter of time. There's so many trials on. I think they said there's like 4 dozen or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch going on. It seems there's enough evidence for people to go, there's something of value here. At some point, this is going to be approved for some kind of treatment. So
yeah,
I guess that's encouraging.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave that one there and on to bread and butter for us. Idiotic lawsuits against products that don't do anything harmful.
Yep.
So this is by Mike Spector writing for Reuters. J&J nears $6.48 billion settlement, with most plaintiffs claiming talc caused their cancer. Okay. Liza, you know much more about this, but my understanding is for years now there have been people women alleging with the help of trial lawyers that baby powder causes ovarian cancer. And the more you look into this, the more studies that you perform, the more clear it becomes that this is a spurious association. It's driven more by activism and anti-corporate sentiment than it is by science. There's really no reason to think that talc is harmful. I mean, I don't know how many billions of people have used talc-based baby powder. I remember using it.
Same.
Our friend Vance Crowe is furious about this because he's like, now I get to chafe because I can't get baby powder. So
that it's it's entirely science-free litigation. It's entirely science-free litigation, and it is destroying good companies that make valuable products for people. And it's really, really unfortunate. The claim is that there was asbestos in baby powder, and that it wasn't there, and that is causing women to get ovarian cancer and people to get mesothelioma. And it's just not true. And the number of litigants gets so high that the shareholders in a company will say, just we got to settle this. And judges will say, you got to settle this because I can't have 125,000 people going to court over this. So in order to spare the courts, in order to spare the shareholders, there's a lot of pressure on the companies to settle. And so settling does not mean that there's any guilt associated with the claim. There is not asbestos in Johnson & Johnson baby powder. There's not, and that allegation is false. And people, what they're trying to do is they're trying to settle and have their spin off a consumer health part of the company to take on all to sort of house all of that litigation, which is that then declares bankruptcy. And what you're doing is you're bankrupting a perfectly good company that has employees that then lose their jobs, that then are not part of the tax pool. That it's just a destructive thing all around. And so it's really unfortunate that this has been allowed to go as far as it has, and I find it very frustrating.
I remember, and it's funny, this is a Reuters story because it was several years ago. Reuters did this deep dive investigation, pouring over all the internal industry documents. There's the quote fingers if anyone sees that. It's the same playbook. It's the same. Our friend David Zarek calls it tobacconizing an industry. The media is often a part of this, where there's these secret corporate documents where they know that there's asbestos in the product, and the argument, from what I remember, was, when you get talc, it's surrounded by asbestos, and the company knew this and they suppressed it. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, there are internal documents where they talk about this and they're evaluating the possibility, but ultimately the conclusion, and again, there's lots of independent research going, there's no there. You're not exposed to anything in what could be considered,
no asbestos. And they've looked specifically very hard for this. So it's just, it's really, really unfortunate for a very good company that makes a lot of good products that people benefit from every day. So, And go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
And the other thing is that, often the plaintiffs aren't the recipients of the settlement. Often it's mostly goes to the attorneys.
It's frustrating, and I don't think people realize that. I know you just said it, but I mean, you're talking about an entire company just going bankrupt, right? So I don't know all the details, but I imagine like all of their assets would be divided. Like they have to pay the lawsuit settlements. If they don't get this, they're gonna have to pay out, and the company's just gonna go broke, So presumably other companies would take over the products that they make, or there'd be some sort of
I don't know how
reorganization. But it's wild. And I mean, it's one thing when a company does something bad. They should be punished, and there should be consequences. If you put an unsafe drug on the market or you lie in your marketing, that should be punished, because you can't be doing that. But I don't even know what the standard is anymore. If you can just make a product that the trial bar decides they're going to target with the help of some NGO, what do you do? I mean,
what do you do?
You stop developing products, or you basically you build into your business model, how do we not get sued into oblivion? And the losers are all of us, right? There's a lot of drugs that are never going to get developed. There's a lot of money that could be spent on R&D that's wasted in court. And I don't know, like nobody benefits from this. And it's fascinating that a huge segment of the public can be convinced that this is good for them, right? Right? It's good for us that we get billions of dollars, right? It's good for us to buy these giant yachts. And as a result of that, it's good for you because we're keeping harmful products away.
Well, what's interesting is all these movies are about these hero lawyers rescuing a community or one person in a community who and that one person gets the payout, but they forget the rest of it, right? Where that community then loses. There's not a product that's actually harming them. Now, if there is harm, fine, but there's not a product harming them, and they lose that source of employment in the community. They lose that tax base in the community. It really is, and you lose a valuable product. So companies that go out of their way to make very, very good, important products that benefit humanity, that actually do work, are made out to be the bad guys, and the lawyers are always the hero. And I think that the story is not quite right.
Yeah, it's a complete and utter lie, is what it is. I call it the Aaron Brockovich redux because and it happens in real life too, but every show you watch, whether it's about the opioid crisis or it's about a pesticide or it's about whatever the product is, it's always the format. Big evil company, dangerous product that they sold under false pretenses. Innocent victim used the product not knowing any better. Brave lawyer, brave regulator, brave single mom paired with a lawyer comes along, saves the day. It's comically dishonest, And just to give you some context with Aaron Brockovich, I have a friend who works for an NGO here in California. They deal with water issues, but they're local, and so they're invested in the outcomes of these things, right? They don't get money if they win a lawsuit, right? They get support if they fix the problem that they're trying to solve. And so, at some point, somebody tried to get Aaron Brockovich involved in the discussion. So like some like high profile activist group, and my friend's group said, get out of here. You are so off your rocker. You're coming in here with your celebrity, but you don't know what you're talking about. You're undermining our cause and you need to go away. Right. So it's fascinating. Even the people who ostensibly would agree with her on environmental issues more broadly don't like her because she's toxic, because she's part of this tort complex that just ruins everything. So anyways, all that to say, it's all horrible. This whole narrative that people accept on this is just deadly. It kills people. So,
well, and it just I just think it's disinformation, and it's really companies. If you like the lifestyle to which you become accustomed, companies make the products that you enjoy. And the thing that I'm most frustrated about at the moment is this whole PFAS discussion, because you are talking about the potential to bankrupt whole communities in order to clean up a non-detectable level of PFAS. It's really, really misleading what's going on about these quote unquote forever chemicals, and I just see the same thing over and over and over again.
That's right. If you want to expose children to deliberately endocrine disrupting chemicals to facilitate their transition, by all means, who are we to stop you? We're only the experts who know that's ridiculous. But if you want to drink tap water that we know is safe and is regularly tested, you may not, because there's PFAS in the water.
That's exactly right. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah, there's no consistency there. The rules, the facts don't matter. It's ridiculous. So yeah, baby powder's fine. You can't buy it in the U.S. You can buy, I think it's cornstarch-based baby powder, which doesn't work as well. So yeah, you get an inferior product, and the prices go up. You're welcome from the trial attorneys. All right, well, on that happy note, everyone have a lovely week, and we will be back next time. Follow us on Twitter. Until then, it's at Dr. Liza MD. I'm at Cam J. English. Come to our spaces Fridays at 11 a.m. Central Time. As I said, we talked about the Olympic boxing controversy this week. Next week will be something equally awesome and interesting. And I always learn stuff. There's always somebody there that says something I didn't know.
Yeah, same here. It's so fascinating. Yeah. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can learn from a lot of people that you just don't see in the headlines. You just don't see it on Twitter. But we've got it. We've got all these people. So come join us. It's a good time. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.